On a freezing winter night in Snow Ridge, as the small town lay silent under a blanket of snow, Michael Carter heard a desperate scratching at his door. When he opened it, he came face to face with a golden retriever mother, exhausted and trembling, with her tiny puppy barely clinging to life beside her. But why was Blizzard here in such a dire state? The strange marks on her body, her haunted eyes, could they be hiding a darker secret? This isn't just a story of rescue. It's the beginning of a mystery far deeper than you'd expect. The night fell heavy over Snow Ridge, its silence broken only by the relentless howl of the wind and the sharp bite of snowflakes swirling in the air. Inside his small, solitary cabin on the edge of town, Michael Carter sat by the fire, a steaming mug of coffee in his hands. Outside, the storm raged mercilessly, blanketing the world in white. It was the kind of night when even the heartiest of souls wouldn't dare to venture out. Michael, a man who had grown accustomed to solitude, found comfort in the routine of such evenings. But this night was different. A faint, scratching noise interrupted the quiet, faint but insistent. At first he dismissed it as the wind playing tricks, yet as it grew more persistent, Michael felt a prick of unease. Throwing on his heavy coat, he made his way to the door, his breath fogging the chilled air. When he opened it, the icy wind hit him like a wall, cutting through his layers. He squinted into the blinding white, and then he saw them. There, on his snow-covered porch, stood a golden retriever mother, her fur matted with ice and snow. Her body trembled violently, her ribs visible beneath her frostbitten coat. Beside her lay a tiny puppy, its golden fur barely discernible under the frost. It didn't move, its small chest rising and falling almost imperceptibly. Michael froze, his heart clenching at the sight. The mother looked up at him, her amber eyes pleading, filled with a desperation so raw that it rooted him to the spot. Her legs wobbled beneath her as she shifted slightly, nudging the lifeless-looking puppy with her nose. The silent message was clear. "Help us." Without a second thought, Michael knelt, gently scooping up the puppy in his arms. Its tiny body was alarmingly cold, a fragile warmth barely lingering beneath the fur. "Come on," he whispered softly to the mother. She hesitated, her body swaying with exhaustion, but eventually followed him inside. The warmth of the cabin was a stark contrast to the biting cold outside. Michael quickly shut the door, sealing out the storm, and carried the puppy to the fireplace. He laid it carefully on a thick woolen blanket, immediately grabbing a towel to rub its tiny body, trying to generate warmth. The mother stood nearby, trembling uncontrollably. Her fur was a mess of snow and ice, and Michael noticed a deep gash on her front leg. Blood had frozen around the wound, and there was a faint, strange smell, something sharp, like oil, that clung to her coat. She took a cautious step toward the puppy, her amber eyes never leaving it. "Easy now," Michael murmured, his voice low and soothing. He worked quickly, rubbing the puppy's body with steady hands. For a moment it remained still, its tiny chest barely moving. Then a faint whimper broke the silence. The sound was so weak that Michael almost missed it, but it was enough to ignite a flicker of hope. "That's it, little one," he said, his tone encouraging. Turning to the mother, he saw her condition was just as dire. Her paws were raw and cracked, her body trembling with exhaustion. She swayed slightly before collapsing onto the rug near the fire, her head resting on her front paws. Michael grabbed another blanket, draping it over her shivering form. "What happened to you out there?" he asked softly, though he knew there would be no answer. The storm raged on outside, the wind rattling the windows and snow piling high against the walls. Inside, however, the small cabin was filled with a fragile sense of safety. Michael watched as the mother nudged her puppy again, her nose brushing its tiny head in a gesture of reassurance. It was as if she was willing her baby to live, refusing to give up. Hours passed, the fire crackling softly in the background. Michael checked on the puppy frequently, his heart sinking each time its breathing faltered. He had never felt so helpless, watching this tiny creature teeter on the edge of life and death. Blizzard, as Michael decided to name her, kept her eyes fixed on the puppy, even as her own strength waned. Every so often she would nuzzle it gently, licking its head as if to comfort it. Despite her own dire condition, her focus never wavered from her baby. Michael couldn't help but admire her resilience. "You're a fighter," he said, softly, addressing both the mother and her pup. By dawn, the storm had eased, and the first light of morning began to creep through the windows. Michael, exhausted but vigilant, noticed a faint but unmistakable sign of improvement. The puppy stirred slightly, letting out another faint whimper. Blizzard, though weak, immediately perked up, her nose brushing against her baby's tiny form. Michael felt a wave of relief wash over him. "You're not giving up, are you?" he said quietly, a small smile forming on his lips. As the morning light illuminated the room, Michael turned his attention to Blizzard's injuries. The gash on her leg was deep, and the strange, oily smell on her coat lingered, piquing his curiosity. What had she been through? He thought of the storm, the brutal conditions outside. Had she been abandoned, or had she fled something even worse, desperate to save her pup? The questions haunted him, but he knew they didn't matter at the moment. What mattered was keeping them alive. Blizzard, despite her exhaustion, seemed to sense his care. When Michael approached her with a bowl of warm water, she drank hesitantly at first, but quickly finished it. She looked up at him with her tired eyes, and for the first time, he saw a flicker of trust. Michael knew the journey for both mother and pup was far from over, but for now they had a chance. A fragile but fighting chance. As he sat beside the fire, watching Blizzard and her puppy rest, he couldn't help but feel that their arrival was no coincidence. They had brought with them not just a mystery but a purpose, something he hadn't felt in a long time. The morning after the storm was eerily quiet, the world outside blanketed in an unforgiving layer of snow. Michael stood by the window, his hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee, watching the light break through the grey clouds. Inside the cabin, Blizzard lay curled protectively around her puppy near the fire, their fragile forms illuminated by the flickering flames. Blizzard's breathing had steadied, and she seemed calmer now, her amber eyes no longer clouded by desperation. The puppy, still weak but showing signs of life, clung to her warmth. Michael felt a cautious hope, yet the lingering questions about their ordeal gnawed at him. Later that day, as Michael chopped wood outside, the sharp sound of a truck engine echoed down the snowy road. It wasn't unusual for delivery trucks to pass through Snow Ridge, but Blizzard's sudden reaction startled him. From her place by the fireplace, she bolted upright, her ears pinned back and her body trembling. A low growl escaped her throat, her eyes fixed on the direction of the noise. Michael dropped the axe, rushing inside to calm her. "What's wrong, girl?" he asked softly, kneeling beside her. Blizzard's growl faded, but her body remained tense, her gaze darting to the door as the sound of the truck faded into the distance. Michael frowned. "Why does that upset you so much?" Blizzard's reaction was too intense to ignore. Michael wondered if the truck's sound had triggered a memory or a warning. Determined to learn more, Michael decided to venture into town the following day. The streets of Snow Ridge were still buried under snowdrifts, but the townsfolk were already clearing paths and returning to their routines. Stopping at the local diner, Michael joined the small crowd gathered for coffee and warm meals. The atmosphere buzzed with chatter, but one particular conversation caught his attention. "Did you hear about that wreck on Route 14?" a man at the counter asked. "Yeah, they say the driver lost control during the storm," another replied. "But what I don't get is why they found the truck empty. No cargo, no nothing, just abandoned." Michael leaned closer. "What kind of truck was it?" Some big rig belonged to one of those companies out of the city, the man said. I heard it was supposed to be carrying livestock or something, but by the time anyone got there, everything was gone. Livestock. The word hit Michael like a jolt. Blizzard's reaction to the truck, the strange smell on her fur, and her visible injuries. Could it all be connected to this mysterious crash? As he walked back to the cabin, Michael's mind raced. If Blizzard had been on that truck, what had happened to her? Had she escaped the wreckage, or had she been abandoned? And more importantly, why? Blizzard greeted him at the door, her tail wagging faintly. She seemed more at ease now, though her injuries were still healing. Michael knelt beside her, gently stroking her golden fur. "You've been through something terrible, haven't you?" he murmured. That night, as the fire crackled softly, Michael sifted through the fragments of what he knew. Blizzard's injuries suggested she had been mistreated, and the smell of oil hinted at a connection to the truck crash. The puppy, so vulnerable and fragile, seemed to be the reason Blizzard had fought so hard to survive. But there was more to the story. Michael could feel it. The next morning, Michael took Blizzard and her puppy outside for a brief walk. The air was crisp, and the snow sparkled under the weak winter sun. Blizzard moved cautiously, her paws leaving delicate prints in the snow, while the puppy stayed tucked in Michael's jacket for warmth. As they neared the road, Blizzard froze. Her body tensed, her ears swiveling toward the faint sound of an approaching truck. This time she didn't growl, but her posture screamed of unease. Michael knelt beside her. "What is it, girl?" Blizzard took a step forward, her nose sniffing the air intently. She seemed to recognize something, her movements deliberate and alert. Michael followed her gaze, but the truck was already gone, leaving only the distant hum of its engine. Michael couldn't ignore the signs any longer. Blizzard's reaction to the trucks, the rumors about the crash, and the clues on her body all pointed to something much larger. He decided to dig deeper. Returning to town, Michael stopped by the library to look up news reports about the crash. What he found only deepened the mystery. The truck belonged to a company notorious for shady dealings, including allegations of illegal animal trafficking. While nothing had been proven, the rumors were enough to make Michael's stomach churn. Had Blizzard been a victim of this cruel trade? Had she escaped with her puppy, only to find herself stranded in the storm? The thought filled Michael with anger and determination. "I'll find out what happened to you," he whispered to Blizzard that evening, as she lay curled up with her puppy near the fire. As the days passed, Blizzard's strength began to return. Her fur grew softer, her gait steadier, and the puppy's playful energy slowly emerged. Yet, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that they were not yet safe. Each time a truck passed by, Blizzard's reaction reminded him that her past was still close behind her. Michael knew he had to tread carefully. Whatever had brought Blizzard to his door wasn't finished yet. The quiet cabin, once a sanctuary, now felt like the edge of a storm. Michael could sense that the mystery surrounding Blizzard was far from over, and he braced himself for what lay ahead. With more questions than answers, Michael resolved to uncover the truth, not just for Blizzard and her puppy, but for the countless others who might still be trapped in the shadows of this dark world. The bond he had formed with them wasn't just one of compassion, it was a call to action. The forest surrounding Snow Ridge was a haunting beauty in winter. The thick blanket of snow muffled every sound, leaving only the occasional rustle of wind through skeletal branches. Michael Carter trudged through the snow, Blizzard by his side and her puppy safely cradled in his jacket. Blizzard had been restless that morning, pacing near the door and nudging Michael insistently. It was as if she wanted to show him something. Trusting her instincts, Michael followed as she led him into the woods. Blizzard's steps were deliberate, her nose close to the ground, sniffing intently as if tracing a faint scent. Her golden coat stood out against the stark white of the snow, a living beacon of resilience. Michael noticed her occasional pauses, where she would look back at him, as if to ensure he was following. "Where are you taking me, girl?" Michael muttered under his breath, his curiosity mounting. The trek was long and arduous, the snow deep enough to make each step a struggle, but Blizzard pressed on, undeterred. Michael, though puzzled, felt compelled to trust her. After what felt like hours, Blizzard stopped abruptly at the edge of a small clearing. She sniffed the air and let out a low whine, her body tense. Michael stepped forward, his eyes scanning the area. The clearing was eerie in its silence, the snow-covered ground disturbed by strange markings. Michael knelt to examine them more closely. The faint impressions of tire tracks crisscrossed the snow, partially obscured by the recent storm, but still visible enough to trace a path. Nearby, he spotted what looked like discarded debris, a piece of torn fabric caught on a branch, a metal clasp half buried in the snow, and a shattered wooden crate. The scene felt out of place, as though someone had hastily abandoned their belongings. Blizzard approached one of the broken crates cautiously, her nose brushing against it. She pulled back quickly, letting out a sharp bark. Michael moved closer and caught the faint smell of oil, the same acrid scent that had clung to her fur when he first found her. "This must be where it happened," Michael murmured, his breath visible in the cold air. Michael's mind raced as he pieced together the evidence. The tire tracks suggested a large vehicle, likely a truck, had been here recently. The broken crates and scattered debris hinted at cargo that had been unloaded or discarded in a hurry. As he examined the area further, he noticed claw marks etched into the wood of one crate. It was subtle but unmistakable, as though an animal had tried to claw its way out. His stomach churned at the implication. Blizzard stood nearby, her body language tense. She seemed to recognize the area, her gaze darting nervously to the edges of the clearing. Michael crouched beside her, running a reassuring hand along her back. "This is where you escaped, isn't it?" he asked softly. Blizzard didn't respond, of course, but her eyes, those amber pools of emotion, seemed to hold a story she couldn't tell. Michael's thoughts turned to the rumors he had heard in town, the truck crash on Route 14, the whispers of illegal cargo being abandoned in the storm. It all began to align with what he was seeing. If Blizzard and her puppy had been part of that cargo, then their escape was nothing short of miraculous. But it also meant they had been victims of something far darker. Michael retrieved his phone and snapped photos of the tracks and the debris, documenting everything he could. He knew he needed to dig deeper, not just for Blizzard's sake, but for the countless others who might still be caught in this shadowy world. As Michael stood, a sudden gust of wind swept through the clearing, carrying with it an ominous chill. Blizzard let out a soft growl, her ears flattening against her head. Michael felt it too, a sense that they were being watched. He turned slowly, his eyes scanning the tree line. The forest loomed, its shadows stretching like silent sentinels. But there was no movement, only the unnerving stillness of winter. "Come on, girl," Michael said, his voice steady but firm. "Let's head back." Blizzard hesitated for a moment, her gaze lingering on the clearing before she followed him. Back at the cabin, Michael laid out the photos he had taken, his mind racing with possibilities. The evidence painted a grim picture. A truck carrying animals, possibly illegally, had crashed or been abandoned during the storm. Blizzard and her puppy had escaped, but at what cost? Michael couldn't shake the thought of the claw marks on the crate. How many others hadn't been as lucky as Blizzard? As he sat by the fire, Blizzard lay nearby, her puppy nestled against her side. The scene was peaceful, but Michael's mind was anything but. "This isn't over," he muttered, his gaze fixed on the photos. "We'll find out what happened, Blizzard, I promise." The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to take shape, but Michael knew this was only the beginning. The clearing, the tracks, the broken crates, these were just breadcrumbs leading to a larger, more dangerous truth, and as he looked at Blizzard and her puppy, He realized that protecting them wasn't just an act of kindness anymore. It was a mission, one that would take him deeper into the shadows than he had ever thought possible. For Michael, Blizzard, and her puppy, the path ahead was uncertain. But one thing was clear. The mystery of their past was about to pull them into something far bigger than themselves. The stillness of the winter night outside Michael's cabin was deceptive. Inside, the tension had become palpable. The evidence Michael had gathered from the forest clearing and the town's rumors had started to form a disturbing picture. Blizzard and her puppy weren't just victims of a storm, they were survivors of something far more sinister. Sitting at the kitchen table, Michael sifted through his notes and photos. Each clue pointed to a chilling conclusion: a trafficking operation involving rare animals. Blizzard and her puppy were likely part of a shipment, meant for a fate Michael couldn't bear to imagine. Michael knew the name of the transport company connected to the crash, Northern Ridge Logistics, a major player in the area. Their trucks passed through Snow Ridge regularly, and though their reputation was pristine on the surface, the whispers of shady dealings painted a different picture. Determined to uncover the truth, Michael began observing their activities from a distance. Under the guise of running errands, he noted the comings and goings of their vehicles, watching as drivers loaded and unloaded crates in a remote warehouse near the edge of town. Blizzard often accompanied him on these trips, her demeanor growing more alert each time they neared the warehouse. She would stiffen, her ears perking up, her eyes fixed on the trucks, as though recognizing the danger they represented. Michael's suspicions were confirmed when he overheard a conversation between two drivers while waiting at a nearby gas station. "Boss was furious about that crash," one of them muttered. "Said it cost us a fortune. We barely salvaged anything." The second man shook his head. "Yeah, well, that's what happens when you're moving stuff you shouldn't be. Can't exactly report it to the cops, can you?" Michael's blood ran cold. He stepped out of sight, careful not to draw attention to himself, but his mind raced. The stuff they were moving could only mean one thing. The animals they trafficked were illegal, possibly endangered. Blizzard and her puppy were lucky to have escaped, but how many others hadn't? Back at the cabin, Michael shared his findings with Blizzard, as though she could understand every word. "You were on one of those trucks, weren't you?" he asked softly, his hand resting on her golden head. Blizzard looked up at him, her amber eyes reflecting a mixture of trust and lingering fear. That night, as Michael went over his notes once more, he felt an unsettling sensation, as though he was being watched. Shaking off the feeling, he closed the curtains and turned his attention back to Blizzard and her puppy, who were peacefully asleep by the fire. But the feeling persisted. The following morning, Michael noticed something strange: tire tracks in the snow outside his cabin, fresh and leading away from the road. His stomach churned. The tracks didn't match his own vehicle, nor did they belong to any delivery service. Someone had been there. Michael's mind raced. Had his investigation attracted the wrong kind of attention? Were the people behind Northern Ridge Logistics aware of his snooping? Blizzard seemed to sense his unease. She stood by the door, her ears twitching, a low growl rumbling in her throat. Michael decided to take precautions. He began locking the doors and windows, something he hadn't done in years in the sleepy town of Snow Ridge. He also moved Blizzard and her puppy into the back room at night, away from the front door. Despite his efforts, the feeling of being watched only grew stronger. On one occasion, while walking Blizzard near the edge of the forest, Michael caught a glimpse of a dark figure in the distance. The figure disappeared as quickly as it had appeared, leaving him with more questions than answers. "They know," Michael muttered to himself, "and they're watching." Michael knew he couldn't stay silent. The more he uncovered, the more dangerous it became for him and the dogs. He needed to act before it was too late. He started documenting everything he had found: the photos of the clearing, the overheard conversations, and the suspicious behavior of the company. He compiled it into a file, preparing to take it to the authorities. But the danger was growing closer. That night, as he sat by the fire, a sudden noise outside made him jump. Blizzard barked sharply, standing protectively in front of her puppy. Michael grabbed a flashlight and cautiously stepped onto the porch. The snow-covered yard was empty, but fresh footprints led away from the cabin, disappearing into the darkness of the forest. Michael realized that his quiet life in Snow Ridge had been irrevocably changed. Protecting Blizzard and her puppy wasn't just about giving them a safe place anymore. It was about standing up against something far more sinister. As he bolted the door and returned inside, Michael felt a mix of fear and determination. Whoever was watching him underestimated his resolve. Looking down at Blizzard, who now lay quietly beside her puppy, Michael made a silent vow. "We'll get through this," he whispered. "I'll make sure you're safe, no matter what." But deep down, he knew the danger was only beginning. The morning was cold and quiet, but Michael's mind was racing. He had spent the night organizing his findings, photos of the tire tracks, notes about the crash, and details about Northern Ridge logistics. The evidence painted a clear picture of illegal activity. However, Michael knew that confronting such a powerful operation alone was dangerous. It was time to involve the authorities. Michael drove into Snow Ridge with Blizzard sitting quietly in the passenger seat, her golden coat shining faintly in the pale winter sunlight. Her puppy stayed safely at home, bundled in blankets near the warmth of the fire. At the local sheriff's office, Michael met with Sheriff Daniels, a no-nonsense man with graying hair and a sharp gaze. Daniels listened carefully as Michael explained what he had discovered. "So you're saying this transport company might be smuggling rare animals?" Daniels asked, his tone skeptical but intrigued. "Yes," Michael replied firmly. "I believe Blizzard and her puppy were part of their cargo. I have evidence, and Blizzard herself might be able to help us." Daniels raised an eyebrow. "A dog leading us to a crime scene? That's a first." "You haven't seen her instincts," Michael said with confidence. "She remembers something, and I trust her." After reviewing the evidence, Daniels agreed to investigate further. A team of officers was assembled to follow Michael and Blizzard to the suspected location. That afternoon, Michael and Blizzard led the team to the clearing in the forest. Blizzard's demeanor changed the moment they arrived. Her ears perked up, and she sniffed the air with determination. She began moving quickly, retracing her steps from earlier treks with Michael. "Looks like she's onto something," Daniels remarked, following closely behind. Blizzard guided the group deeper into the woods, her movements precise. After several minutes, she stopped abruptly at the edge of a large, snow-covered clearing. Michael felt his pulse quicken as he spotted the faint outline of a warehouse hidden among the trees. "This is it," he said, his voice low. Daniels gestured for his team to fan out. The officers approached the warehouse cautiously, their boots crunching softly in the snow. As they neared the building, Blizzard growled softly, her body tense. Michael placed a reassuring hand on her back, whispering, "Stay close, girl." Inside the warehouse, the scene was unsettling. Rows of cages lined the walls, many of them empty, but others still holding frightened animals, exotic birds, small mammals, and even a few larger creatures. The air was heavy with the smell of oil and fear. "Dear God," one of the officers muttered. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed through the building. A group of men appeared, their faces hard and eyes sharp. They froze upon seeing the police, but quickly moved to block the exits. "You shouldn't be here," one of them growled, his hand inching toward his waistband. Daniels stepped forward, his hand resting on his holstered weapon. "Snow Ridge Sheriff's Department, you're under investigation for illegal animal trafficking. Stand down." The tension in the air was palpable. One of the men lunged for a weapon, and chaos erupted. As the officers engaged the traffickers, Blizzard darted into action. Her instincts kicked in, and she began barking loudly, drawing attention to a hidden corner of the warehouse. Michael followed her, his heart pounding. In the shadows, he discovered a locked cage containing documents, shipping manifests, client lists, and transaction records. This was the proof they needed to dismantle the operation. Michael grabbed the papers and called out to Daniels. "Over here! I found something!" Blizzard continued to bark, her focus unwavering. She circled a stack of crates, her nose pressed to the ground. Michael opened one of the crates to find more evidence: tags, collars, and identification markings from animals that had likely been taken illegally. "She's incredible," Daniels muttered, impressed by Blizzard's sharp instincts. The traffickers, realizing they were outnumbered, eventually surrendered. One by one, they were handcuffed and escorted out of the warehouse. The animals were carefully removed and transported to a nearby sanctuary for care. Michael stood with Blizzard by his side, watching as the police secured the scene. The adrenaline coursing through him began to fade, replaced by a profound sense of relief. "You did it, girl," he said softly, kneeling to scratch Blizzard behind the ears. "You saved them." Blizzard wagged her tail, her amber eyes reflecting a quiet pride. Later that evening, back at the cabin, Michael sat by the fire with Blizzard and her puppy. The warmth of the flames and the peaceful breathing of the dogs filled the room with a sense of calm. The events of the day had been overwhelming, but Michael knew they had made a difference. Blizzard's courage and sharp instincts had not only saved countless animals, but had also given Michael a new sense of purpose. As he looked at Blizzard, now resting peacefully with her puppy, Michael felt a deep gratitude for the strange and fateful encounter that had brought them together. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that their journey wasn't over. The people behind the operation would likely try to rebuild elsewhere, and Michael knew he couldn't turn a blind eye. For now, though, they had won a hard-fought victory, a testament to the bond between a man and a dog, and their shared determination to stand against cruelty and injustice. The air in Snow Ridge was crisp and cold, but there was a lightness that had been missing for weeks. The storm of danger and mystery that had clouded Michael Carter's life had finally lifted. The operation was over, the traffickers were in custody, and the rescued animals were on their way to safety. Michael stood outside the sheriff's office watching as the last of the evidence was loaded into police vehicles. Blizzard sat beside him, her golden coat glowing faintly under the pale winter sun, her puppy nestled in her shadow. Sheriff Daniels approached Michael, his expression a mixture of respect and gratitude. "You did good, Carter," Daniels said, extending a hand. "Without you and her," he added, nodding toward Blizzard, "we might not have cracked this case." Michael shook the sheriff's hand, but shrugged modestly. "I just followed the trail. Blizzard did most of the work." Daniels chuckled. "You're too humble, but I'll let it slide. Just know the animals you helped save owe you their lives." The weight of those words settled on Michael as he looked at Blizzard. She was calm now, her amber eyes scanning the street as if searching for the next challenge. The drive back to Michael's cabin was quieter than usual. Blizzard lay curled on the passenger seat, her puppy snuggled close. Michael couldn't help but glance at them, a wave of relief washing over him. They had survived not just the storm, but something far darker. Blizzard and her puppy had been victims, but now they were survivors, and Michael had played a part in that transformation. As they pulled into the driveway, the sight of his humble cabin felt like a balm. The snow-covered roof, the smoke rising lazily from the chimney, it was a symbol of the peace they had fought to reclaim. That evening, as the fire crackled warmly, Michael sat in his armchair, watching Blizzard and her puppy play on the rug. The puppy, once weak and fragile, now pounced clumsily on Blizzard's tail, earning a patient nuzzle from his mother. Michael sipped his coffee, his thoughts drifting to the journey that had brought them here. The tire tracks, the warehouse, the tense standoff. It all felt surreal now, like a story from another life. But the evidence was there, neatly filed away in the sheriff's office. The traffickers were facing justice, and the animals were finally free. It wasn't a perfect victory. Michael knew there were likely others still trapped in similar situations, but it was a start. "You've done more than enough, girl," Michael said softly, leaning down to scratch Blizzard's ears. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly in contentment. Blizzard's transformation over the past weeks was remarkable. The fearful, trembling dog he had found on his porch was now a confident and calm companion. Her trust in Michael was evident in every wag of her tail and every glance of her warm, amber eyes. The puppy, too, had grown stronger, its playful energy a testament to the care and love it had received. Watching them together filled Michael with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. He realized that Blizzard had not just survived the ordeal, she had triumphed over it. And in doing so, she had brought something invaluable into Michael's life: hope. The town of Snow Ridge, though small, had taken notice of Michael's quiet heroism. Word had spread about his role in uncovering the trafficking ring, and while Michael shied away from the attention, he appreciated the occasional nods and smiles from his neighbors. One day, Sheriff Daniels visited the cabin with an unexpected gift, a plaque recognizing Blizzard as an honorary member of the Snow Ridge Sheriff's Department. "She deserves it," Daniels said with a grin. "She's got better instincts than half my deputies." Michael laughed, his heart swelling with pride as he placed the plaque on the mantel above the fireplace. Blizzard sniffed at it curiously before returning to her puppy, who was now chasing a stray sock across the room. As the weeks turned into months, life in Snow Ridge returned to normal, or as close to normal as it could be. Michael continued to care for Blizzard and her puppy, their bond deepening with each passing day. The cabin, once a lonely retreat, now felt like a home filled with life and warmth. Michael found himself smiling more often, his days punctuated by the playful antics of the puppy and the quiet companionship of Blizzard. The memories of the case remained, but they no longer haunted him. Instead, they served as a reminder of what could be accomplished when compassion and determination prevailed. One crisp spring morning, Michael stood on the porch with Blizzard and her puppy at his side. The snow had melted, revealing the vibrant green of the forest beyond. Birds sang in the distance, their melodies blending with the gentle rustling of leaves in the breeze. Michael took a deep breath, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. He didn't know what challenges lay ahead, but he was ready to face them, with Blizzard and her puppy by his side. As he turned to head inside, Blizzard paused, her eyes scanning the horizon one last time. Then, with a wag of her tail, she followed Michael into the cabin, her puppy trotting happily behind. The door closed softly, sealing them in a world of peace and promise, a fitting reward for the battles they had fought and the lives they had changed. The long winter in Snow Ridge gave way to the first signs of spring. The snow that had once blanketed the town melted slowly, revealing patches of green grass and wildflowers peeking through the thawing earth. The crisp chill in the air was replaced by a gentle warmth, carrying with it the promise of new life. For Michael Carter, the change in season felt symbolic. The storm that had once defined his days, both literal and figurative, was now a distant memory. In the cozy cabin that Michael called home, the air was filled with the sound of playful barks and the soft thud of paws against the wooden floor. Blizzard and her puppy had brought an energy that transformed the once quiet space into a sanctuary of joy. The puppy, now sturdier and full of mischief, darted around the living room, chasing after a ball that Michael rolled across the floor. Blizzard watched her pup with calm vigilance, her golden coat shimmering in the sunlight that streamed through the windows. Michael leaned against the doorframe, a contented smile on his face. He hadn't known how much he had needed this, a family, a reason to wake up each day with purpose. The town of Snow Ridge, small and tight-knit, had embraced Michael, Blizzard, and the puppy as their own. Neighbors often stopped by to visit, bringing treats for the dogs or simply to chat. Michael, once reclusive, found himself opening up to the warmth of the community. At the town's spring festival, Michael brought Blizzard and her puppy along, much to the delight of the children who gathered around to pet them. Blizzard remained calm and dignified, while her puppy reveled in the attention, wagging its tail furiously. "You've become quite the local celebrities," Michael teased Blizzard, scratching behind her ears. She responded with a wag of her tail, her amber eyes soft with affection. Inspired by the new season, Michael decided to start a small garden in the backyard. With Blizzard lying nearby, her puppy tumbling through the fresh grass, Michael worked to till the soil and plant seeds. The act felt therapeutic, a way to nurture life after months of uncertainty and struggle. As he worked, Michael glanced at Blizzard. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" he said aloud. Blizzard lifted her head, her ears twitching as if in agreement. The garden quickly became a favorite spot for the trio. On warm afternoons, Michael would sit on a wooden bench, watching Blizzard and her puppy play among the flowers and budding plants. The scene was peaceful, a stark contrast to the chaos that had brought them together. Though the shadow of their shared past still lingered in his mind, Michael had learned to see it as a source of strength rather than pain. Blizzard's courage, her unwavering determination to protect her puppy, had inspired him to confront his own struggles. Michael often found himself reflecting on the night Blizzard appeared on his porch. What had seemed like a random act of fate had turned out to be a transformative moment for all of them. "You saved me as much as I saved you," Michael said one evening, his voice soft as he stroked Blizzard's fur. She leaned into his touch, her quiet presence a testament to the bond they now shared. Blizzard's puppy, who Michael affectionately named Sunny, grew stronger and more spirited with each passing day. Sunny's golden fur glistened in the sunlight, and his boundless energy kept Michael on his toes. Sunny had an uncanny ability to bring joy wherever he went. Whether it was bounding through the fields or curling up beside Michael on the couch, his playful spirit was infectious. Blizzard, ever the watchful mother, let Sunny explore freely but never strayed too far from his side. The bond between them was unbreakable, a constant reminder of their journey and the resilience that had carried them through. Michael found himself volunteering at the local animal shelter, inspired by Blizzard's story and the animals they had helped save. He spent his days helping others find homes for rescued pets, sharing the lessons he had learned about compassion and the transformative power of love. Blizzard often accompanied him on these visits, her calm presence reassuring even the most timid animals. Sunny, too, became a favorite at the shelter, his playful antics bringing smiles to everyone he met. The work gave Michael a sense of fulfillment he hadn't felt in years. Blizzard and Sunny had given him more than companionship. They had given him a renewed purpose. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Michael stood on the porch, looking out at the forest that had once held so many mysteries. Blizzard lay at his feet, her puppy snoozing beside her. The sky was painted with hues of orange and pink, the air filled with the soft hum of crickets. Michael took a deep breath, feeling a peace he hadn't known in years. "This is what home feels like," he said softly, more to himself than anyone else. Blizzard lifted her head, her amber eyes meeting his. In that moment, Michael felt a profound gratitude for the storm that had brought them together, for the trials they had overcome, and for the family they had become. As he stepped back inside, Blizzard and Sunny followed, their silhouettes framed by the warm glow of the cabin. The door closed behind them, sealing in the love and hope that had come to define their new life. Spring had brought a new beginning, and with it, the promise of many more seasons to come.
What would you do if you found a bleeding golden retriever trembling behind your dumpster? Too scared to bark, too broken to run. Eli Madden, a lonely janitor barely surviving paycheck to paycheck, didn't think twice. But what he didn't know was who had done this to the dog, or that saving him would force Eli to confront a violent past he buried decades ago. This isn't just a rescue story. It's about scars, old and new, and the quiet power of choosing love over fear. The rain hadn't let up for days in Dayton, Ohio. It was the kind of cold November rain that seeps through your boots, hangs in the air like regret, and makes everything seem older, grayer, heavier. The sky was a smudged slate, and the old neighborhoods bore the weight of it in silence. Roofs sagging, gutters overflowing, streets shining with puddles of oily water. On Oak Ridge Lane, where most houses leaned inward from age and neglect, sat number 212. Peeling blue paint clung stubbornly to its wooden siding. The iron gate tilted slightly off its hinges, and a rusted mailbox bore the fading nameplate, E. Madden. Eli Madden, 47 years old, lived alone in that house. He had the look of a man who'd been on his feet too long, tall but stooped, his back bent not by age but by the accumulated weight of years of manual labor. He had thick hands, work-worn and cracked, the kind that once held wrenches and copper piping but now gripped mop handles and buckets. His clothes were plain. Flannel shirt, heavy work pants, a faded brown jacket. His beard was rough and peppered with gray, trimmed only when he could afford razors, and his eyes, pale gray like the clouded sky, carried a sadness too old to be recent. Years ago, Eli had been a plumber, one of the best in his crew, but a fall from a second-story scaffold shattered his left wrist and tore his life off course. Now, he worked as a janitor at Washington Elementary, pushing mop buckets through empty halls and cleaning up after children who never noticed him. He didn't talk much, didn't go out except for work. People called him quiet, though some neighbors said strange. He wasn't, just tired. That evening, Eli was dragging a heavy garbage bin toward the alley behind the school. The rain had softened to a steady drizzle, and the wind had lost its bite, but everything was still wet, still miserable. The alley behind the school was narrow, hemmed in by chain-link fencing and half-crumbling brick walls. The dumpsters there always stank: sour milk, moldy bread, rotten fruit from the cafeteria, and the rain only made it worse. As he turned the corner to dump the bin, he heard it, a sound that didn't belong. It wasn't the clatter of trash or the rattle of rain. It was small, raw, painful, a whimper. Eli paused, listened. The sound came again, barely there, like someone trying to cry but failing. He moved cautiously, squinting into the shadows cast by a flickering security light. Behind one of the dumpsters, half hidden beneath a flattened cardboard box and some torn trash bags, something stirred. At first, he thought it was just another stray raccoon or possum, maybe a rat feasting on school leftovers. But as he stepped closer, he saw fur, golden, but caked in blood and filth. Then he saw a face, barely recognizable as canine, the snout swollen, one eye shut, ribs jutting out like someone had carved the meat right off them. It was a dog, a golden retriever, or what was left of one. The animal tried to shrink away from him but couldn't move more than a few inches. It whimpered again, the sound broken, more breath than voice. Its body trembled, soaked and filthy. Eli saw deep abrasions along its legs, and around its neck was a raw, open ring of torn skin, likely from wire or some other makeshift leash pulled too tight for too long. He crouched slowly, speaking without realizing. Hey now, it's all right." The dog flinched as he reached out, its breathing ragged, sides barely rising. It tried to crawl, dragging its legs awkwardly, one paw slipping in the wet filth, and collapsed again. It looked up at him then, just for a moment. One eye swollen shut, the other glossy and pleading. No bark, no growl, just a silent surrender. And then, as if it had spent every last ounce of will to show him it was still alive, the dog collapsed fully. Head against the pavement, limbs limp, breath shallow. Eli stayed crouched there in the rain, unmoving, staring at the broken creature in front of him. He didn't have the money. Hell, He barely had enough food for himself. The fridge at home held 3 eggs, half a loaf of bread, and a jar of expired mustard. His gas had been shut off twice that year. He hadn't been to a doctor in 4 years. But none of that mattered in that moment. He slipped out of his jacket and wrapped it around the dog. The animal was alarmingly light, as if hollowed out. Eli stood cradling it gently in his arms. It didn't stir. A passing car splashed through a puddle down the street, but Eli didn't look up. He walked back through the alley, across the school lot, and out toward Oak Ridge Lane. His boots sloshed through puddles, pants soaked to the knee. His face stayed expressionless, but inside him something cracked open, quietly, like the soft break of dawn behind thick clouds. And high above, behind a lace-curtained window across the street, a woman watched him. Ruth Bellinger, 72, lived next door in number 210. She was short, always wore thick wool sweaters and mismatched slippers, and still hung wind chimes on her porch even though she claimed to hate the noise. Ruth was the kind of neighbor who remembered birthdays, noticed comings and goings, and always peeked through the window when someone was walking past, just in case. She'd been married to a fireman, Gus Bellinger, who died in a warehouse collapse 20 years back. Since then, she lived alone, tending her geraniums and watching the world unfold quietly from her front parlor. She saw Eli come home wet, cradling something in his arms like a lost child, and though she couldn't see what it was, she knew. Ruth had known dogs her whole life. She felt it like a whisper against the heart. She turned from the window, pulled her old firehouse jacket tighter, and whispered to the room, "God help them both." And outside, the rain continued to fall. The wind had calmed, but the cold remained. It was the kind of cold that seeped through old windows, curled around ankles, and made the bones of a house creak louder than the silence it held. Eli Madden sat cross-legged on the fraying carpet of his living room, his old flannel shirt stained at the cuff, watching the golden retriever sleep beneath a blanket by the radiator. The dog's breathing was shallow but steadier than the night before. Its fur, cleaned gently with a wet towel and a trembling hand, was less clotted with blood now, though scars, jagged, cruel ones, still ran in red lines beneath the grime. Eli hadn't slept. Not really. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the way the dog had looked at him. More apology than fear, like it had done something wrong by surviving. He'd boiled water, mixed it with oats and a bit of powdered broth he had stored away for emergencies, and fed the retriever by spoon, drop by drop, until it stopped resisting. He didn't know what to call the dog at first. It had no collar, no tag, only a neck so torn it seemed the chain once around it had tried to swallow the creature whole. But sometime just before dawn, as the heater hissed its slow lullaby and the dog gave a tiny sigh and leaned its head into Eli's boot, the word slipped out. "Lucky," he said, barely above a whisper, and the name stuck, not because it fit, but because it didn't, not yet. Later that morning, Eli walked the 3 blocks to the school, coat zipped high, collar up against the biting wind. His job didn't start until mid-afternoon, but he needed something. Gauze, antiseptic, anything that could help. The school's medical cabinet was modest, but Mrs. Penwell, the school nurse, rarely locked it. He waited until the front office emptied, slipped into the side hallway, and used a rusted paperclip to nudge open the cabinet latch. His fingers hovered. He took only a few rolls of gauze, a small bottle of antiseptic wash, and some cotton pads. Nothing too obvious, nothing anyone would miss. On his way out, he passed the art room where Miss Kendra Harper, the only teacher who ever bothered to speak more than 2 words to him, was hanging up finger paintings. Kendra was in her early 30s, tall and warm-skinned, with a laugh like spring rain, and a braid that reached the small of her back. She glanced at him, her paint-streaked hands resting on her hips. "Morning, Mr. Madden," she said. "Morning," Eli replied, not meeting her eyes. "Everything okay?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, just picking up something." She smiled. "Well, if you ever need supplies or whatever, I've got extra soap, hand sanitizer, even old towels from Art Day. We throw out more than we use." Eli gave a tight smile and kept walking. Back at home, he tended to Lucky's wounds. The dog flinched at first, especially when Eli's hand neared its neck. But Eli was patient. He'd learned patience the hard way. Each time Lucky whimpered or pulled back, Eli stopped, waited, spoke softly, hummed under his breath. Eventually, Lucky let him clean the sores, but it was clear the dog didn't just fear pain, it feared hands. As the days passed, Eli watched for signs, any clues about Lucky's past. The way the dog jerked awake at certain sounds. The squeak of hinges, the rattle of keys, the snap of a belt. The way it froze at the sight of a rope or cord. Something terrible had been done to this animal, and not once. Repetition had etched itself into its bones. On the 5th day, when Lucky finally stood on his own and limped to the kitchen doorway, Eli made a decision. He needed help, real help. Down 5 blocks on Portman Street was a small veterinary clinic run on donation and heart. Eli had never been inside, but he'd seen the line of battered cats and limping dogs waiting with their owners on Saturdays. He wrapped Lucky in a towel, bundled him into an old laundry basket, and loaded him into a rust-specked shopping cart. He pushed the cart slowly, careful over every bump, ignoring the stares of strangers. The clinic was tucked between a shuttered laundromat and a pawn shop, its windows fogged and the sign above barely legible. Portman Street Pet Relief. Inside, the waiting room smelled of disinfectant and dog biscuits. A young woman behind the desk looked up as Eli entered, surprise flashing across her face. She stood quickly. "You need help?" Eli nodded, gesturing to the basket. "He's hurt. Found him behind the school a week ago." The woman stepped around the desk. She was maybe 25, with a small frame and short chestnut curls tied up under a headband. Her eyes were sharp but kind. Her name tag read, Marla Vet Tech. "Let me see him," she said. She crouched beside the basket, pulled back the towel gently. Her eyes darkened at the sight of the scars. "Do you know what happened?" Eli shook his head, only that someone meant to kill him, and didn't finish the job. She was quiet for a long moment, running her fingers lightly near the torn skin without touching. "This one," she murmured, pointing to the circular scar on Lucky's front leg. "That's from a tether. Not rope, metal. And this, see this indentation here? That's a muzzle line. Too tight, probably for hours, maybe longer." She looked up. He was restrained, likely beaten, forced into compliance. Eli swallowed. Why would anyone? Marla stood. "Some people train dogs like machines, for shows, for security, even for fighting. Goldens aren't fighters, but if someone wanted an obedient performer, or just wanted power over something weaker." She didn't finish the sentence. She brought a warm blanket, checked Lucky's vitals, and gave Eli a small tin of antibiotic cream. "It's not much, but it'll help. We don't charge for rescues." Eli looked at her, unsure how to thank her. She smiled gently. "He's lucky you found him." Eli nodded. "That's what I named him." Back home that evening, Eli sat by the radiator with Lucky curled beside him, wrapped again in that same brown jacket. The house was quiet, save for the occasional creak of the walls or the buzz of the old fridge. Eli stared at the small scar on the dog's brow, wondering how deep the pain ran. His mind drifted. He remembered being 8. hiding in the hallway closet as his father screamed through the house, slamming things, breaking the glass on the kitchen cabinets. He remembered the sound of the belt. Crack, snap, silence. Then his mother's breathless pleading, and later the slow creak of the closet door, and his father's slurred voice. "Don't think you're safe just 'cause you're quiet." That night, Eli slept lightly, hand resting near Lucky's back, and when the dog stirred from a dream and let out a soft, muffled yelp, Eli whispered, "No one's gonna hurt you again." And in the dark, Lucky did not flinch. The frost had crept in overnight, layering the sidewalks of Dayton with a delicate sheen of silver. Eli Madden stood at his front steps, pulling his coat tighter against the cold. The sky above was a dull, lifeless blue, the kind that promised no warmth despite its brightness. Lucky padded beside him, still limping but stronger now, his once dull fur beginning to regain its sheen. His ribs no longer protruded like scaffolding, and though his movements were cautious, he wagged his tail sometimes, small, hesitant sways of hope. It had been 3 weeks since Eli found Lucky behind the school, and each day since had been stitched together with routines. Morning feedings, short walks, quiet evenings by the heater. The dog had stopped flinching when Eli touched his head, though any attempt to reach near his neck still sent tremors through his body. On this particular evening, Eli decided to walk Lucky a bit farther, down toward the edge of Lincoln Avenue, past the shuttered bakery and the old pawn shop with its sun-bleached sign. The city lights glowed in pools on the wet pavement, and steam rose from the sewer grates like ghosts slipping free. Lucky walked beside him, ears alert, nose twitching, until they rounded the corner toward the lot behind the old hardware store. Then Lucky stopped. The golden retriever's body went rigid, every muscle locked in sudden terror. His ears pinned back, and a low, rasping growl rose from his throat. Not like the protective barks Eli had heard before, but something deeper, a sound rooted in memory, a wound. Eli followed Lucky's gaze and froze. Parked at the far end of the alley was a red truck, faded with a crooked bumper and mismatched side mirrors. Its front grille was patched with duct tape, and a steel crate sat bolted in the back, stained with something dark. The driver's door was open. From behind the truck stepped a man. Balding, stocky, late 40s, with a thick neck and arms covered in ink, snakes, flames, barbed wire, names in Gothic script. He wore a bomber jacket with grease stains, and a cigarette dangled from his lips. The man stopped when he saw them, and then he smiled. "Well, I'll be damned," he said, his voice a rasp soaked in smoke and gravel. "Ain't that the mutt I lost last month?" Eli stepped slightly in front of Lucky, heart hammering. "You know this dog?" "Oh, I know him," the man said, tossing the cigarette and stepping forward. "Spent a lot of time and money on him. Obedience, scent tracking, even pain resistance. He was going to make someone a real winner." "Winner?" Eli said, voice flat. "In the pits," the man said casually, like he was discussing baseball. "Illegal, maybe, but profitable, until he bolted." The name came to Eli then, unbidden. Mick Raleigh. He'd heard it once, murmured by Marla in the vet clinic, while she scanned old records of cruelty reports. Mick Raleigh, former dog handler turned underground trainer, suspected of running illegal fight rings and performance trials, never convicted. Lucky growled louder, backing into Eli's legs. "You're not getting him back," Eli said. Mick laughed. "You think this is a custody dispute? He's property, he's mine. And I don't like thieves. He's not property, not anymore." Mick's face shifted, laughter draining into something colder. "That right?" Lucky barked then, sharp, high, panicked. His front legs staggered forward, but Eli caught his collar gently. "Leave," Eli said. "I'm not going to say it again." For a long second, Mick stared. Then he spit to the side, smirked, and turned back toward his truck. "You'll regret this," he said as the engine rumbled to life. "They always do." As the red truck vanished into the fog, Eli stood frozen, Lucky trembling at his side. Marla found him at the clinic the next morning. Dark circles under his eyes, hands trembling slightly as he fed Lucky biscuits in the corner. "You saw him, didn't you?" she asked quietly. Eli nodded. Red truck, tattoos, called Lucky property. She sat beside him on the bench, arms crossed tightly under her coat. "Mick Raleigh, I've been digging. He had 3 citations for animal abuse in Missouri, all dropped. One raid turned up a kennel of malnourished dogs, all tagged with performance labels. B1, C2, like inventory. No one would testify. The evidence vanished. Witnesses recanted. He vanished for a year, then turned up here." He said Lucky was trained to fight. Marla shook her head. "Goldens aren't fighters, but they're smart and loyal. If someone wanted to test pain tolerance, or teach them to suffer without biting back—" She trailed off, staring hard at the floor. Eli exhaled. "There's nothing we can do, is there?" "Not yet," she said. "But I've reported him. Quietly. I've spoken to someone in animal control. They'll monitor the area." A few days later, there was a knock at Eli's door. He opened it to find Ruth Bellinger, his elderly neighbor, standing in her thick coat with a foil-covered plate in her hands. "You've been feeding that dog broth and oatmeal, haven't you?" she said. Eli blinked. "Yes." "Well," she said, handing over the plate, "I had some roast turkey I was going to toss, no seasoning. I thought maybe your guest might like real food for once." She smiled, slightly, barely, but enough to show it wasn't just about the turkey. Ruth was not a woman known for softness. Since losing her husband, she'd lived like the world owed her nothing, and she owed it even less. But she'd seen Lucky now, really seen him. And it stirred something long buried. Eli took the plate gently. "Thank you, Ruth." "You'll need protein to heal a soul," she said. "Same as a body." Lucky wagged his tail once as Ruth turned to leave. She paused, then looked back. "Tell him he's not alone." That night, as snow began to whisper against the window panes and Lucky lay curled beside Eli's worn recliner, the man reached over and placed a single hand on the dog's back. Lucky flinched, then relaxed, slowly. In the dark, Eli whispered, "We're going to keep you safe." And Lucky, for the first time, fell asleep without trembling. The snow had thickened overnight, blanketing Dayton in a quiet white silence that softened even the sharpest corners of the city. Eli Madden stood at the kitchen window of number 212, watching the flakes drift like falling ash under the amber street lamp. Behind him, curled tightly on an old wool blanket, Lucky whimpered in his sleep. Soft, muffled sounds that broke Eli's heart with every breath. It had started that morning. Lucky had refused food. His usual spark, what little had returned since the alley, dimmed to a faint flicker. His breathing turned shallow, his body burning with fever. Eli had wrapped him in towels, checked his temperature the way Marla had shown him, and tried to soothe him with broth and cool water. But by nightfall, the dog was trembling uncontrollably, his legs kicking out in dream-born terror, claws scraping across the wooden floor. Now Lucky thrashed again, a low whine rising to a hoarse bark as he twisted onto his side. Eli dropped to the floor beside him and gently wrapped his arms around the dog's body. "Shh," he whispered, pulling Lucky close. "It's all right, you're safe. I'm here." Lucky stiffened at the touch, then slowly settled, his breathing ragged but steadying. Eli held him like that for hours, his back aching, legs numb, but he didn't move. Not until Lucky opened his eyes briefly, clouded with pain, and weakly lifted his head to lick Eli's hand. It was the first time he had ever done that. Eli swallowed hard, blinked against the sudden warmth in his eyes, and let the tears fall freely. At the clinic, Marla hadn't been sleeping either. She'd been combing through footage sent anonymously by a former volunteer with the rescue network. Her laptop flickered with grainy video, faded timestamps, the faint hum of a handheld camcorder. The footage was old, perhaps 2 or 3 years, but the setting was unmistakable. A warehouse, cement floors, metal crates lined in rows, shadows moving behind fencing, and then she saw him. Lucky, younger, cleaner, but unmistakable. His golden fur still full, his eyes wide and terrified. A man, Mick Raleigh, appeared on screen, dragging the dog by a leash so tight it lifted his front paws off the ground. Mick shouted commands. Lucky hesitated. That hesitation earned him punishment. A looped cord thrown over a rafter, hoisting him just high enough to force him onto his hind legs. The voice in the video praised the method. Total submission training, no bark, no bite, just obedience. Marla slammed the laptop shut, bile rising in her throat. Back at number 212, the storm began to fade by morning. Snow rested heavy on the windowsill, and the house was cold. Eli had drifted into a shallow sleep beside Lucky when he heard the knock. 3 soft taps. He pulled himself to his feet and opened the door to find a young man, tall and lean, with a shaggy brown hair tucked under a knit beanie. His eyes, gray like Eli's, were guarded, lips pressed into a line of practiced detachment. A worn backpack hung over one shoulder. His coat was too thin for the weather. "Ricky," Eli said. "Hey," the young man replied, glancing past him into the house. "Got your address from Aunt Delia. Said you hadn't changed it in 20 years. "I haven't." They stood in awkward silence. Ricky was 19 now, no longer the boy who used to wait on the porch for his mom to come home from chemo. His frame was taller, but thinner, like something stretched too fast. He had the same posture Eli remembered from their last fight, the one just after the funeral, arms crossed, chin lifted, defiance masking heartbreak. Ricky hesitated. "I didn't come to fight, just wanted to see if you were still alive." Eli stepped aside. "Come in." The warmth of the room was relative, but it was still better than the wind outside. Ricky stepped inside and immediately noticed the sleeping dog. "Is that yours?" he asked, voice softer. "His name's Lucky," Eli said. "Found him behind the school a few weeks ago, nearly dead." Ricky crouched, careful not to get too close. "He looks rough." "He's been through worse." The boy was quiet for a moment, then added, "Kinda like you, huh?" Eli didn't reply. "You still working nights?" Ricky asked. "Yeah." "Still living alone?" "Not exactly," Eli said, nodding toward Lucky. The silence stretched again until Ricky broke it. "You know," he said, voice strained, "I used to think you let Mom die." Eli's head jerked up. "She always said we'd be okay, that we could fight it, but we didn't have money for treatment. And you just kept working, mopping floors. I thought if you'd just tried harder, she would have—" "I tried," Eli said, the words scraping raw. "I worked every hour they gave me. I sold my truck. I begged hospitals for help. But she was stage 4, Ricky. Nothing short of a miracle would have saved her." Ricky nodded slowly, eyes still fixed on Lucky. "I didn't know that then." Eli sat down beside the recliner. "I didn't explain it then." They sat in silence for a while. Then Lucky stirred, letting out a low moan. Ricky leaned in, holding out his hand gently. The dog sniffed, then nudged against it. He trusts you, Ricky said. Eli smiled faintly. I'm still working on earning it. That evening, Marla arrived unannounced. Her coat was soaked with melted snow and her cheeks were flushed from wind. I have something you need to see, she said, stepping inside without waiting. She nodded politely to Ricky, who raised a brow but stayed quiet. Marla opened her laptop and played the footage. Eli watched in horror. Ricky's jaw tightened. Lucky, asleep on the blanket, stirred at the sound of the man's voice in the video and whimpered. We need to take this to the police, Eli said. They won't move without chain of custody or proof it's him, Marla said. But I've sent it to a friend in animal control, quietly. She'll start monitoring every report tied to a red truck or a man fitting that description. Eli nodded slowly. Then we wait. No, Marla said, her voice sharp. We prepare. That night, Ricky stayed. Eli gave him the old pull-out couch and 2 extra blankets. Before turning in, Ricky crouched beside Lucky one last time, stroking his fur. You're tougher than you look, old guy, he whispered. From the corner, Eli watched, eyes tired, but heart a little less empty. And in the stillness of that storm-washed house, something old began to mend. The wind howled down Oak Ridge Lane like it had teeth, rattling the brittle windows of number 212. Inside, Eli sat at the small kitchen table, stirring a cup of lukewarm coffee, while Ricky flipped through a local newspaper, pretending not to be worried. Lucky lay nearby, resting his chin on Eli's boot, tail flicking contentedly now and then. His fever had broken days ago, and the change in him was undeniable. Less trembling, more alertness, even a few clumsy tail wags when Ricky returned from errands. But beneath the surface, Eli knew the storm hadn't passed. It had only gathered strength. It returned in the form of a red truck. Eli was walking Lucky near the alley behind the corner laundromat when he saw it parked crookedly against the curb, engine idling. Before he could react, the driver's door slammed shut, and Mick Raleigh stepped out. His bomber jacket was the same, though now dirtier. His face wore a cruel grin, a toothpick dancing between yellowed teeth. Well, look who's still dragging my dog around, Mick said, voice low and smug. Eli tightened his grip on Lucky's leash. He's not your dog. That's funny, Mick said, reaching into his coat pocket and pulling out a folded piece of paper. 'Cause this here's a certificate of ownership from back when I chipped him. Still registered under my name. That means legally he's mine. Eli's jaw tensed. After what you did to him, you think a piece of paper erases that? Mick stepped closer, the grin twisting. You don't get it, do you? Dogs don't get choices. They do what they're told, or they end up in a ditch. You're lucky I'm giving you a chance to hand him back without trouble. Behind the corner, just out of sight, Ricky stood with his phone raised, camera recording. He had followed Eli earlier, sensing something was off. He caught every word, every sneer. Eli squared his shoulders. If you come near my home or Lucky again, I will report you. This time, you won't walk away. Mick's eyes narrowed. You don't scare me, janitor. No, Eli said calmly, but the truth might. Mick scoffed, turned on his heel and climbed back into his truck. You'll regret this, he called out through the open window, before the engine roared and the truck disappeared down the street. Back home, Eli sank into the recliner, rubbing his temples. Lucky sat by the door, eyes fixed on the entryway like a sentry. Ricky paced the living room before holding up his phone. Got it all, he said. Audio, video, plate number, threats, and the part about the chip. Eli looked up, surprised. You were there. I had a feeling, Ricky replied. I've seen guys like him before. They think the law's too slow to catch up. That evening, they met Marla outside the clinic. She wore a wool coat too large for her frame, a scarf wrapped around her neck, cheeks red from the cold. She listened to the video, her lips thinning with each second. "I can match this with the footage I found," she said. "Together, it's enough to file a report. I have a friend in the department, Officer Jenna Locke. She's handled animal cruelty cases before. We'll send this directly to her." "Will it be enough?" Eli asked. Marla nodded. "It's enough to start surveillance, maybe even bring him in for questioning. If he shows signs of tampering with the chip registry or threatening behavior again, they can build a real case." They submitted the files the next day. And for the first time since this began, Eli felt like they weren't just surviving. They were fighting back. That same week, Lucky began doing something new. Every night after dinner, he would trot to the front door and sit there, alert and calm, watching the street from behind the curtain. If someone approached, he would give a low, short bark, not fearful, not aggressive, just enough to announce, "I'm here. This is home." Eli took it as a gesture of trust, protection. It made the house feel less hollow, like something alive was defending it from the world outside. But then something unexpected happened. It was Saturday morning. Snow had melted into muddy slush along the sidewalks, and Eli decided to bring Lucky over to Ruth's house with a loaf of bread and some leftover stew. She hadn't answered his knock in 2 days, which was unusual. Ruth, despite her stern disposition, always noticed things, and she never missed the chance to criticize someone's punctuality. They crossed the yard, Eli carrying the wrapped food, Lucky trotting beside him. He knocked on her door. No answer. "Ruth?" he called. "It's Eli. Brought you something." Still nothing. Then Lucky perked up, ears forward, nose twitching. He stepped toward the side of the house, pawing at the door. Then he barked, sharp and loud, once, twice. Eli's stomach dropped. He fumbled for the spare key Ruth had once handed him, "in case I break a hip or you get curious." Inside, the kitchen lights were on, and the smell of something burnt hung in the air. Then he saw her. Ruth lay on the floor near the stove, motionless, one hand outstretched toward a spilled pot of water. Eli rushed over and knelt beside her. She was breathing, but faintly. Her pulse fluttered, her face pale. He called emergency services with trembling fingers. The paramedics arrived within minutes. One, a tall woman with short blonde hair named Carla, said Ruth had likely suffered a mild stroke but was found just in time. "If she'd been here an hour longer," she said, "this might have gone a very different way." Lucky sat quietly in the corner, tail wagging slowly, watching every move. When they wheeled Ruth out, he barked once, not sad, not scared, just letting her know, "We found you. You're not alone." That evening, Eli sat on the porch with Lucky lying beside him, and Ricky perched on the steps watching the last traces of sunset fade into the rooftops. "You know," Ricky said, tossing a stick down the path for Lucky to chase, "for a dog that was half dead a month ago, he sure turned into a guardian angel." Eli smiled. "Sometimes the broken ones fight the hardest." Lucky returned, dropped the stick at Ricky's feet and nudged his leg. Ricky laughed for the first time in days. From across the street, lights flickered on in Ruth's house. Though she wouldn't return for some time, the porch light remained. Eli took it as a promise, that they'd be ready when darkness came. The first clear day after the storm was the kind that made even cracked sidewalks glisten. Sunshine poured through the frost-bitten trees of Dayton, melting the last of the snow into glistening rivulets that streamed along gutters and down drains. The air held a chill, but it was a gentle one, like the tail end of something harsh finally giving way to something kinder. At number 212, Eli Madden sat on the porch steps with a thermos of coffee in one hand and Lucky curled at his feet, head resting on Eli's boot as if it had always belonged there. The past week had been a whirlwind, but now everything felt suspended, quiet, balanced. 2 days earlier, the police had raided an abandoned warehouse on the edge of town. Inside, they found cages, rusted metal, hay scattered across damp floors, 3 emaciated dogs chained to the walls with bowls of greenish water and cracked ribs. And they found Mick Raleigh. He had no time to run. The evidence, the footage from Ricky's phone, the archived videos Marla had discovered, and a paper trail of veterinary neglect left no room for escape. He was arrested on the spot, cursing and snarling as the cuffs clamped down. Local news picked up the story, spinning the headline as a community rescue victory. Among those interviewed was Officer Jenna Locke, a sharp-eyed black woman in her 40s with pressed blue slacks and a voice that carried calm authority. She told reporters, "This case could have gone unseen, but thanks to a few brave people and one very loyal dog, we were able to intervene before more animals were harmed." They aired Eli's story that evening, complete with a clip of Lucky resting his head in Eli's lap. Viewers called in, some offered donations. One woman even tried to adopt Lucky but was kindly turned away. At the school, where Eli still swept classrooms and cleared the cafeteria tables, Principal Hargrove called him into the office. A tall, graying man with stern eyes and a surprising softness in his voice. "You've done something good, Mr. Madden," he said, folding his hands on the desk. "Something that makes this place proud. We don't have much in the budget, but the board agreed. It's time your kindness gets noticed." He handed Eli a white envelope with a modest check labeled Community Honor Grant. It wasn't much, but for Eli, who hadn't seen a gift with his name on it in over a decade, it was enough to make him blink twice before nodding his thanks. Back at home, changes unfolded in gentle layers. Ricky had unpacked the rest of his things, books, a few shirts, a weathered guitar, and hung a calendar on the wall by the kitchen with circled dates and training sessions. He had enrolled in a local vocational program, something with auto repair and metal work. "I figured," he said one morning, flipping eggs in a pan, "if I'm gonna stick around, I might as well be useful." Eli didn't say anything right away, but he placed a firm hand on his son's shoulder, held it there a moment, and then smiled. "That's all I ever wanted." Ricky glanced away, his mouth twitching with a smile of his own. And then there was Marla. She started visiting more, sometimes with veterinary supplies, sometimes just with stories and coffee. Her laugh grew louder in the house, and her shoes found a permanent place by the door. Lucky had taken a liking to her quickly, often nudging his nose under her hand or flopping beside her like a sack of fur. Ricky, who once mumbled through greetings, now stood straighter when she walked in. He even combed his hair once. One evening, as the 3 of them sat on the porch, Eli with his coffee, Marla with her sketchbook, and Ricky tuning his guitar, Marla laughed at something Ricky said, then paused, eyes meeting his. "You're not what I expected," she said. "I get that a lot," he replied. She smiled and returned to sketching Lucky. Her fingers moved with a surprising care across the page, capturing the tilt of his ears, the curve of his resting form. Ricky watched her for a long time, then softly played a tune neither of them recognized, but all of them felt. That night, after the house had gone quiet, Eli stepped outside with Lucky and stood on the porch beneath the rusted iron awning. The stars peeked out between patches of cloud. The street, once a place of shadows and threats, now felt like part of something he could belong to again. Lucky stood beside him, tail thumping lightly against the porch rail. "You did good, boy," Eli whispered. "You saved her. You saved us." Lucky leaned into his side, and as the old porch light flickered on overhead, bathing them in gold, the 2 sat together in the silence. Man and dog, both once abandoned, both now whole. Sometimes the greatest miracles don't come wrapped in thunder or lightning. They arrive quietly, on four legs with broken ribs and fearful eyes. They come in the form of second chances, warm hands, and the courage to love something fragile. Eli Madden didn't have riches. He didn't have a grand plan. But he had a heart willing to fight for a creature everyone else had given up on. And isn't that just like how God works? He doesn't always choose the strongest. He chooses the willing. He lifts up the broken, the unwanted, and reminds us that no life is ever too damaged to be redeemed. Eli's act of compassion became a ripple of change, for Lucky, for Ricky, for a whole community. In your life, maybe you've felt forgotten. Maybe the world has been harsh, cold, and unkind. But just like Lucky found Eli, maybe someone, or something, has been sent to remind you, your story isn't over. Healing is real. Kindness matters. And sometimes a broken heart is the soil where God plants His greatest miracles. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs a reminder that love still wins. Comment Amen. If you believe that no soul, man or animal, should ever be left behind. May God bless everyone watching this and bring you the peace and courage to be someone's light after the rain. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more real stories of hope, healing, and the love between animals and the people who never gave up on them.